Throughout the past series of Back on the Shelves, you've seen me play F.E.A.R. First Encounter Assault Recon, the 2005 psychological horror adaptation by Monolith Productions. A vividly entertaining game to attract mature audiences to a captivating, jump scare and atmospheric first-person shooter experience. Like you've all seen, I've tremendously enjoyed playing it despite its current outdated graphics, which were actually still pretty good, and the fact that the story could have been more in-depth and personal, and that some desirables were left untouched, while others were executed almost perfectly. Join me now in this summary where I'll be going over important pointers from my experiences with the game that would indicate why and how strongly I believe that F.E.A.R. is a worthwhile piece of entertainment to be talked about again, and thus deserves a spot back on the shelves. First Encounter Assault Recon was released as a PC game on October 28, 2005, in anywhere but Japan for once. Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 got the game in equally late 2006 and mid 2007, respectively. Some people categorize it in the horror genre. I don't really think it belongs there. Sure, there were blood, guts, and jelly all over the walls. Hell, when you shot someone, they just plumb exploded, depending on the angle, which is actually really cool. But many would argue that that's just about it. The story doesn't really go far to scare its audience. I guess the little girl that you soon find out is named Alma appears around corners and in many cases craftily disappears again. You can turn the corner yourself and you won't see where she is anymore. But you don't really see a lot of murder going on that she herself could bring about, which is, if I'm honest, what I was kind of expecting a bit. People being burned alive, decapitated, their skin ripped from their bones. That's kind of the stuff you hear from people saying that the game is really good. And all of these things she seems to have the power to do, but you don't actually see it. She doesn't actually seem to want to do it in the presence of the protagonist. This can come off as a little bit strange for a horror game. You have to think about it, of course, but it can bother you if it's supposed to be a horror game, and the creepiest thing you get from Alma's actions is just a few charred skeletons here and there throughout the game, and her peeping around walls. This is all just killing soldiers, and the story is only somewhat vaguely interacted with whenever the character you control somehow manages to force his way outside of literally colossal office buildings full of people. Again, a thing you'll need to kind of think about to realize is a little off, but what really bothered me is that everybody seemed to think that all of that, like me killing legit hundreds of trained, armored, elite, armed-to-the-teeth soldiers with modern weapons that belong to a major pharmaceutical company's private army, is the most normal thing in the world. All the while, the only emphasis to my success is at the very start of the game where they mention that my skills in the field are quote-unquote off the charts. What?
You've seen his
Okay.
training results. His reflexes are totally off the charts. I think he can handle himself.
Whatever, man. It's your call.
Goddamn right it is.
A question, by the way, that takes one to play through the entire game to answer in a quite unsatisfactory manner. Just an epiphany the guy seems to have. Or maybe it's just a message that Alma is showing him. I don't know how that really works. I guess it's subject to opinion. And that feels a bit weak to me. More, however, on why I believe the story could, in a big way, not have improved from what it is later. But don't worry, I believe that all of this is largely justified. It doesn't stop me, however, from rating the game's story quality out of 10 to a 5. I realize it's a low score, especially for a game I'm supposed to be bragging about, but here's what Monolith Productions did to pull themselves up from what the more story-hungry players would be a bit disappointed by in this title. And that's the second factor, physics. Not only important because of this game's type, but because of its genre too. F.E.A.R. makes use of the Havoc physics engine. Other popular titles that use this engine for their physics include BioShock, BioShock 2, Saints Row, Sleeping Dogs, Just Cause 1, Half-Life 2, believe it or not, for something called quote-unquote network-enabled and bandwidth-efficient physics engine as derived from Havoc. So I'm not saying they didn't use Source. Disney Princess Enchanted Journey as well. Age of Empires 3 and Age of Empires Online, and actually the entire Assassin's Creed series, and many, many more, but not all acclaimed to be played on the PC as per what F.E.A.R. uses it for. As far as the physics engine in this game goes, I don't have to say much. Playing almost any part of the game for about 5 minutes convinces you that the physical realism F.E.A.R. represents is truly stunning, especially for its time. that successfully combined with physically volumetric explosions, as I've felt, smart lighting, something that even Crysis 3 was bragging about in its tech demo trailer, and the best part for me, sounds that played when interacting with objects in a certain way from a certain angle, like these cans or bottles on the floor that would make a noise if you pushed them or stepped on them. They'd roll in a distance directed. They'd roll in a certain direction based on where you're coming from, and the noise you'd cause could alert nearby enemies. Very cool, very well thought out. Even though it could have just as well turned out to be quite a small portion of the game, but it wasn't. They didn't change the decor a lot, often just abandoned warehouses, mansions, and laboratories, but the somehow extremely realistic faux 3D decals, holes in the walls that occur from something damaging them or you shooting the wall like you've seen many times, more than made up for that. And that's not even mentioning how thoroughly it depends on how, from where, and with what you're shooting someone or something to determine how it will move, and it's usually just about as realistic as you or I am. For this reason, I award F.E.A.R. for its amazing use of physics, despite the fact that it's a fucking 2005 game, a good 9. Next up are the graphics. Comparing this to other games of its time and the shooter genre, like Postal 2, Call of Duty 2, Resident Evil 4, it seems like pushing the envelope almost. And the best part of it is that it wasn't like the further you progressed through F.E.A.R, the worse and more lazily designed it started to look, like with a lot of games. Nope, they just kept their heads held high and tinkered on this masterpiece until it was ready for its big bang. A very important part of the graphics that a lot of games have serious problems with is that when a character model has to move, the textures on the model often stretch out, which isn't too terrible on the face of it, but when you look closer, or when you get to move closer to the character, it looks like a hideous distortion. That's just shitty. World of Warcraft, to mention one, famously had this issue, and it still does, I believe. That's 2013. I mean, I guess you can't really fix that issue anymore unless you just totally revamp the models, and a lot of people would be complaining about that. You know, they're fucked, basically, if they don't make it properly at the start, which was 2004, so I guess I could understand. Then again, they are a major franchise. So this is unacceptable, and often a way for you to be able to tell if a game or expansion was rushed or not. Though, having realized this, most game manufacturing companies actually start with designing the characters nowadays, because that takes a whole lot from the budget anyway, I guess. And you've clearly seen throughout the series that F.E.A.R doesn't suffer from that at all. I'm very contented with all of the textures, even the terrain and everything. Of course, playing it on a modern PC in 2013, you can feel here and there, like when you're in a helicopter that flies over and you overlook the city, that's just an image. It could have been a bit more. But then, that was 2005. That was what you're used to, not only, but pushing it a bit further, and tons of people would have to be complaining that their machines couldn't handle high-level graphics like that with their fucking 3-year-old single cores, half a gig of RAM, and second-hand graphics card or whatever. And, that feeling, that because of how much better my computer is than the average one in those days, therefore didn't happen as much as it could have. It occurred to me very rarely. So that's a job well done to begin with, I'd say. I feel they've made excellent decisions when it comes to the look of F.E.A.R in general, and that's saying a lot as well, because due to the genre, which in layman's terms says that it has to be scary, means that they have to adhere to a set of color schemes, like a palette, to create the atmosphere that accommodates both combat with high-tech weapons, as what happened, and the scariness factor and the struggle involved. Hold that on account when thinking of how much time and effort would be needed to make both the engine work properly and the beautiful textures, quite high polygon count models, and other graphical aspects without making major mistakes. This is where most companies and products just lose it, and because of that, I gladly bestow F.E.A.R with another 9 out of 10. But we're not done yet. Audio. I'm glad I can say this for a game that combines both stunning graphical prowess with a brilliant use of physics engine to boot. Their musical score was amazing. In 2005, not a lot of games had actual quality scores developed. Much thought of it begs the truth that a game like F.E.A.R would require the right kind of music and sound to put its audience in the appropriate mood to enjoy the game optimally, and they did an amazing job. The music changed intelligently when a new situation demanded it. The sounds were realistic, distance-based, and multi-directorial, and as far as accommodating any situation in the game whatsoever, it succeeded with flying colors. That, again, is saying a lot considering the difficulty that must have been involved in creating the proper setting for all situations the characters endured in this title. I'm glad to say they really hit the key just right on that one. Equally important, of course, even though it wasn't all too frequently of use due to the lack of a strongly evolving story, the voice acting was of high acting quality. even on the often found voicemail records on phones, which our character, come to think of it, seems to have an uncanny interest in listening to when lives are at stake, particularly his. The audio factor in F.E.A.R scores a brilliant 9. I'm not being easy with these numbers, mind you, these just happen to be seriously deserved. Yet again, 2005 game, so justified praise. Another factor I'm going to be using to judge any game in this series is the AI, or artificial intelligence. Since nowadays, and I think actually ever, it's been part of every single game, it's pretty important. And in F.E.A.R, I believe this is uncommonly great. I'm of course only going to judge the single player part since that's the only part I played, and since I'm quite shitty at pretty much every game, I'm not going to try the multiplayer. But don't take my word for it. The NPCs acting as a team to overtake the player, which happened, communicating over their voice comms intelligently, it would seem. The ever-memorable, "I can't," isn't going to leave me any day soon. And the brutally amazing change that the bullet time ability, or here dubbed reflex time apparently, brings to the AI is top of the crop. It earned Monolith Productions GameSpot's 2005 Best AI Awards, and the number 2 spot on AI Game Dev's Most Influential AI Games. Objectively, that has not got to be an easy feat. The AI earns F.E.A.R a 10 for its time. Seriously, I don't think you'll ever see me giving that score again, not until fucking Pac-Man goes turned sentient, but it was worth it. And last but not least is the target factor. Whether or not the game is a good business model and succeeds to fulfill the demands their trailers and info released beforehand instills in people's hearts. Not much to say here, really. F.E.A.R's story would have been very helpful in part of this aspect of that it's supposed to be a scary game. Because that's where most of the scariness is supposed to be derived from, in my opinion. I'd not like to think that the developers would argue, well, you should have played the game in a dark room, and setting that like a kind of requirement, like having a certain graphics card or stronger and this amount of RAM, that would be unprecedented and frankly really stupid. I wasn't as scared as I should have been on many occasions, and though most of the game I played with both monitors on in a fully lit room, with my window wide open on broad daylight, I did get the heebie-jeebies on some of the ones that counted. For this, I'd struggle to give them an 8, so I'm going to go with 7.5. That's 5 for story, 9 for physics, 9 for graphics, 9 for audio, a whopping 10 for AI, and an audience target factor score of 7.5. That makes for a final score of 8.25, well deserved. I would have given the game a global 9, but this is what taking the average of all the separate scoring numbers results in, and it looks pretty legit. Does F.E.A.R deserve its spot back on the shelves? Yes, is the answer. There you go for the summary on F.E.A.R. I'd say it more than deserves a spot in the Common Talk again, because it was definitely incredible fun playing it. I really enjoyed it, and it made me look forward to playing its sequel, which I have also not yet opened.
I just wanted to assure you that the origin situation has been resolved.
But so much for discretion.
It was unavoidable. There is some good news, however. The first prototype was a complete success.
And that's not even mentioning how thoroughly it depends from where and with what you're shooting someone or something to determine, dude, that's fucking terrible.